Uh, we have this podcast every Tuesday from 6 to 7, and we answer some questions about different topics that may be of interest to you, especially if you're a champion for young people and that you work with children and youth, whether that is as an expanded learning person, or maybe you're a teacher, or maybe you work in at the school during the day with the kids, or maybe you do some sort of connection with them that's not in a school realm. Maybe you're a coach, a babysitter, but you're somebody who cares about kids and you'd like to hear some different points of view. So tonight we're talking about a really interesting topic, I think, which is called fostering creativity. And creativity is that ability to think outside the box, to look at what is and go, I wonder what else I could do. And I think that creativity starts with curiosity. It starts with wondering. It starts with that whole notion that you can be in awe of the world. And so be amazed at what goes on. So we're going to be talking about fostering creativity. If you have any questions that you'd like for us to address in particular, please put them in the chat box so that we can get them. Robert's here manning the back office, and Coach is here. How you doing, Coach?
Doing good. And I think, too, as you were talking, I was thinking, shocker. Uh, yeah, always thinking about something. But anyway, we talk about this trifecta. So when we go out and we help any of those types of people or programs or whatever, and we do our consulting or partnerships or whatever you want to call those, it always comes down to that trifecta. Is it about the mindset? Is it about structured schematics, which is systems, processes, and procedures, and or is it about the player? And what we find is that probably 70 to 80% of the challenges for people are in these structured systems. And so we have so many of these things like the trilogy or the Fab Five or the Nifty Nine or Super Seven. We have all these different things that we can help people to plug into. And we have a really good system. And we say we're the one-stop shop to any child champion, which is basically anybody in the world that we can help them, whether that's in the secular world, whether that's in the public setting or in the private setting as well. So just to let everybody know, we have a lot of stuff coming on our new website, and we look forward to being able to help not only in the podcast, but moving forward as well.
Absolutely. I just want to comment on the trifecta. I don't know if you were able, those of you who are listening were able to catch that, but that trifecta is really important for you to understand. And if you give us your email, we will send you a brief document that will describe that trifecta. And I think that it will really help you look at things differently, right? Is it the mindset? Is it your structures and systems and all of those procedures and protocols? Or is it the people that you need to work with? So thanks for bringing that up, Coach.
Am I choppy or something? Is my
what?
When you said they may not have heard it, is my microphone not working?
No. They may have just heard it briefly from you. And I know that you could talk about it and really explain it in depth. But I would like for them to understand how important that is. It's not, it sounds like this simple little thing. It's really foundational to how you can think. And that way you can also foster creativity as well.
Yeah, I mean, if you talk about it's probably 90% of everything, or really it's 100%. We can plug anything into those three items. Probably fairly important foundationally.
Absolutely. So thank you for bringing that up. So Robert, what's the first question?
All right. The first question is, why is fostering creativity important for youth?
So it's been about, I don't know, 7 or 8 years ago that they identified what's called the 4 C's. And they said in the 4 C's that these were the things that young people needed to develop in order to be a full participant in the workforce. And I don't believe it's changed at all. And if anything, they've added a C. But the first C was that you're able to communicate and that you're able to share your ideas. Okay, well, if you've got a novel or new way of thinking about something, and you can't share it with others, that's a problem. And maybe your communication will be in the form of a drawing or a diagram, or it might be a simulation, but you're able to communicate this new thinking that you have. The second is that you're able to collaborate. So that was the first C, communication. The second C is collaboration. And when you really get to the point where you're collaborating with other people, it's amazing what multiple brain power will do, right? When you're thinking by yourself, you are limited to your frame of reference, to your lived experience. But when you start working with others in collaboration, it takes your viewpoint and it broadens it. And when it broadens it, it allows you to be more creative. The third C was critical thinking. And critical thinking is the ability to look at the pieces. So if you're looking at a full puzzle and all you can see is the full puzzle and you don't get to see the pieces, that's problematic. And so being able to think critically. Now you may wonder why I told you those three. I did because number 4 is creativity. That you're able to take the communication between you and other people. You're able to read things. You're able to collaborate. You're able to critically think. And then you use your creativity to put things back together in a different and better way. And so creativity is really important. And that's one of those ways that young people who aren't as constrained with lived experiences and things have to work a certain way are able to bring in their creativity. So I think that it's an important one of the 4 C's. The 5th one would be citizenship of the world. And certainly we're that as well. But that's what I would say in regard to why is it important to foster creativity. It's one of those 4 key elements that young people need to develop in order to navigate a very complex world. So Coach, I'll push it to you at this point.
Yeah, so I want to start with the communication, which is where you start as well. And so, even this is creativity, right? It doesn't seem like it's very creative, but it is. We try to have the Jesus model around here, which is to meet people where they're at, right? And so we have this, what we call the wonderful WIIFM. We have Captain Caption. We have all these different things out there to be able to figure out exactly how can we, best serve the person or the group or the large group that we're working with. And so if you think about why we say the Jesus model, he didn't just sit in the synagogue, as I've said many times, just sit back, and go, okay, come to me. He went down and met people where they were at. And so we try to do that. And starting with communication is how do they learn the best? Because we can be the greatest communicators of all time, but if we're not doing anything visual, and they're a visual learner, which is about 60+% of them, that's a problem. Or what about if they're a kinesthetic? What about if we're not giving them a board to write with or to do something? Can we at least give them a pen to fiddle with? Or like in my case, I'm an auditory primary learner. And so when we talk about communication, you can be the greatest communicator in the world, but the wrong style for that particular person. Now, when you have 20, 30, 100 people, which we talk to, that makes it a little bit difficult. So what we try to do is all 3 of those things, right? To make sure. But if it's one-on-one, I always ask them. I talk to them about the Captain Caption. That's like the comic book that says what's going on in their head. What are you trying to accomplish? And they're saying, I'm trying to learn blah, blah. Okay, well, what's your best learning style? And you may have to explain it to them. Are you kinesthetic? Are you audio? Are you visual? Are you a little bit of all 3? How would you rate that? And then the same thing with the WIIFM. Let's tune into the FM dial of their radio station so that we can understand what are they trying to accomplish and what is the best learning style for them. And so then we can communicate with them in a more effective way. And when that happens, that's going to build their confidence, their resiliency. It's going to enhance emotional expression for them as well, because maybe people don't talk with their hands, but they go, oh, well, maybe this person's a visual. So maybe I don't have a whiteboard, but I can still kind of draw it out. I can draw out the S curve or whatever the case may be. And then also with the critical thinking, that's going to boost innovation and problem solving And all of these things, in my opinion, are foundational to creativity.
Couldn't agree more. So thanks for that. So Robert, what's question number 2?
Yes, question number 2 is how can I create an environment that encourages creativity?
Okay, so I think 2 things. One, and this isn't my phrase, it's an Angeles Arians phrase, but I think it's a really important one. It's called be open to outcome, not attached to it. So if you want to create a safe space for kids so that they can venture out and try things out, then you need to be really careful about being prescriptive. A lot of times, and I'll just use this as an example, it's Halloween. And we want every kid to make an orange pumpkin that has 2 triangle yellow eyes, 1 triangle yellow nose, and a mouth with 1 tooth. And then we're going to put a green stem on the top. And what we do is we put that out, and kids are to follow the directions and do it exactly so that they all look alike. And that's being attached to the outcome. When you're open to the outcome, you talk to the kids that we're going to be doing something around Halloween. I want you to think about what would be the best pumpkin for you. And maybe they'll do it in purple or red or white. It doesn't matter. What you're doing is giving them the opportunity to consider what does it look like to you? What would be a great pumpkin as far as you're concerned? So I think that being open and understanding that you have to be open to outcome, not attached to it. And it's not that you can never be attached to it, but if you are, you need to make that really clear. I'm attached to this outcome. It needs to look this way when you're said and done. And that's perfectly legitimate for you to do that. That's not bad. It's just that sometimes we need to be open. The other thing I think is that it's really important you're not judgmental, that you don't look at something and go, ew, that's not very good, because maybe it's not good to you. And I don't know about you, but if you've ever looked at Picasso, who's quite successful as an artist and quite creative, I look at his stuff a lot of times and I think, ew, that I don't like that. That's not the kind of art that appeals to me. I'd rather see a flower that looks like a flower, right? And so you need to know that creativity is not just in your eye. You have to value that in their eyes it's creative, and to not be judgmental. So for me, that would be 2 things that I would suggest, that you make that space as judgment-free as possible. And and I need to say this, it doesn't mean that you can't have guardrails on, right? So that they don't fall off the cliff. But it does mean that within that, those guardrails, they have some options that they can do. And so you're open to outcome, not attached to it. And you're really leaving judgment out. And it's not that you just leave it out without saying it. It needs to be left out as far as your face is concerned too. Because I know sometimes I can have a look on my face that says, wow, not wow in a good way. So we really want to be sure that we are being open to them. So Coach, how about you?
Oh my goodness, you just gave me like 10 points. I got to figure out where to start. Going back to communication, right? Nonverbal, when you say your face, right? Going back to the first part of what you talked about, we can say a lot without saying one word, right? I think I got flipped off the other day and they said a lot by that. But anyway, so I just was taking notes like crazy as you were talking. So the first thing that I want to talk about is the prescriptive versus parameters, right? And those of you that can't see me, I got my hand that's saying stop and my other hand that's saying come forward. Especially when it goes back to the structured schematics, which are the systems, processes, and procedures. If you go too deep into that and you don't give them the room, meaning it's more prescriptive than it is parameters, then you're in trouble. So how do you find that happy medium, so to speak? That's why I think that in the perfect world, people would get trained asynchronously. They'd go watch a video Then they would go and they get a theory training where it should be split down the middle. That would say, here's some theory stuff that we can add to the video, and plus we can answer the nuanced questions that you may have in the video. And then what we're going to do is the second half of the theory is some kind of, simulation or scenario based situation to where you're able to teach them. Then you go out into the field and they're doing their thing. And we call that coaching, where we're going to coach and say, hey, do you remember the video? Or, hey, do you remember the theory? Or, hey, do you remember the simulation? This is the spot, because sometimes, it misses. So sorry, this is going to be long-winded. I got a lot to say. The other thing earlier we were talking about was what we call the Wiley W's, the who or the why, who, what, when, where, and then the how spelled backwards, right? And so when you talk about, how do you create an environment for that? If you ask the open-ended questions, put a what or how in front of it, that's a really good thing to do, because anything that they can shake their head at or shrug their shoulders, if you say, do you, did you, whatever, that's not a good question. The other thing that I wrote down here is, look, you can have all the opinions you want, but you just better not judge, right? And what's the difference? Well, judgment says right or wrong. Opinion says, this is what I think about this situation, right? And as I've said before, I'm a pretty blunt guy. If you bring me your baby and your baby's not cute, I'm not going to say, oh, your baby's so cute. I'm going to say, good for you, congratulations, and different things of that nature. So I will have an opinion, but I'm not going to judge. Maybe you think your baby's beautiful and everywhere in between. That's why this world, whether you throw subjective or objective in there, is, everybody looks at something different. That's why we can get 10 different counts on one wreck, right? Everybody's saying it was the blue cat, or somebody else says it was the giraffe, and somebody else says they were texting, and somebody, right? So I think there's a lot there, but I think we need to give the parameters like maybe like a tricycle, where they have the two wheels, where it gives them some wiggle room there. But maybe we don't just take them all the way off right at the beginning. And a lot of that has to do not so much with age, but with ability, which is where I think we got some things wrong with pre-K, K-12, is we group them by age versus ability. I get the social part of it too, but so I'm going to stop there. I have another 4 things, but you got me going pretty good on that one.
All right. I think one of the most interesting words that you said in that conversation was nuance. I think that I don't think that we pay enough attention to nuance. And in a group of 20 children, when you say, when you leave things open, you're going to have some kids who struggle with that because they're used to being told to do this and this and this. We were working with a 4th grader over at the coast, and they were going to do a project. And he came to the teacher and he was in near tears, and he said, you have to tell me exactly what to do. And she said, I'll get you a partner. And he didn't want a partner. He wanted somebody to say. And so for some kids, training wheels have to be a little closer than for others. But that nuance is an ability to read that and to understand that when you say something, not everybody's going to hear the same thing. Some kids are going to hear you say, you have to do it exactly this way, even when you're saying it's open, right? Here's a thought about what you can consider, but for some kids, that means that's the only way. So you're going to have to work through that nuanced part of working with kids, because I think that adds a difficulty level. How about that? So I don't know if you want to say anything more about nuance, but that was a word that really stuck out to me.
Well, it's important. That's why I don't love text, right? Because, we talked about this several weeks ago. If I say in a text, the boy was afraid to run home, then most people would think, run home because there's a guy in a mask, right? Most people would think, like you talked about earlier, Halloween, and it's scary and whatever. But what about if it's the kid rounding third to be able to go home to touch home base, and the guy in the mask is either the umpire or the catcher, right? Then it shouldn't be as scary. And so that's why, for me, a simple yes or no, which is what we shouldn't be asking anyway in this case, but a simple yes or no can be written. But if it's more nuanced than that, then probably we need to talk about it. And that opens up a lot of communication, a lot of conversation. But I also think that if we're, if we have a non-judgmental room to begin with, then people are going to be a lot more open, and that environment's going to be a lot better for creativity. I could say more on that, but I'm going to be quiet.
All right, thanks for that. So Robert,
All
what's
right.
up?
Our next question is, what activities inspire creativity, no, creative thinking in youth? Sorry.
So, a lot of times I think we think of VAPA, visual and performing arts, as the area of creativity. And it certainly is. When visual arts would be actually drawing or painting or sculpting, doing something that you can see. And then there's also music, and that music can be instrumental, it can be vocal, and it can also be learning how to enjoy it and appreciate different styles of music, right? As well. And then there is dance, and dance can range across the board, right? Any number of kinds of dance. And then finally, it's drama, right? So we think of those, and absolutely, those are creative avenues for kids. But so is creative writing a story, trying to capture maybe something that's happening, but then also put it into a new environment. So you can absolutely do it with that. You can do it with games and building games or design challenges, right? How can you design whatever? How can you design a tower that will be freestanding, that can hold a book? Okay. Now you've kind of set the criteria for success, and I would always encourage you to let kids at least add one to that. But that's creative, because it's just putting stuff together randomly isn't going to get you a tower that will stand. So that could be a design challenge. So I think that we can offer up a lot of things. I think cooking can be creative, right? If you follow the recipe exactly, okay, but what if you put a little pizzazz in there? Do a little something different. So I think that there's, in almost everything we do with kids, if we set it up for them to think on their own and try and add a little bit to the assignment, I think we're supporting creativity. But certainly VAPA, STEAM activities will do that, and really, and creative writing, that kind of thing will certainly help kids to demonstrate creativity.
Yeah, and I look at it much more broadly than that. I think that any activity, so I'll just give you a few examples. So I had a partner when we had a little thrift store and selling all this stuff behind me and whatever, and I called him MacGyver. And for those of you that are too young to know about MacGyver, you can look him up. But this guy could just create anything out of anything, right? It was kind of like the A-Team back in the day, and he could create a bomb, or he could, I mean, it was just amazing, the creativity of what he could do. Another one is sports, right? The way that these guys will catch the ball now with one hand, they never did that back in the day. It was always two hands. So just being creative on the way that you catch or the way that you spin out of something. There's, back in the day, you used to have to go over the high jump bar in a certain way, where they called it the roll, where you had to roll over where your stomach was down on the bar until the Fosbury flop came around. To me, that was extremely creative. Or the person that trained for the 4-minute mile, that was extremely creative, to be able to understand that altitude would help you to be able to go sub 4 minutes, because it had never been done before. I think that when I was a kid, me in intramurals, I didn't just say go to the tree and I'll hit you. I had a lesson playbook, right? My lesson plan, so to speak, was a playbook. And I'd give my guys the playbook, and I said, if you don't know your plays, you're not playing, right? And so I think there's just so many different ways to be creative. And I think what we do is typically limit it to the things like, visual and performing arts, or, different dance or different things of that nature. But I look at it now and say, let your, what do they say, that let your board be a blank slate, and you just go paint it however you want.
Right. For sure. For sure. Creative problem solvers, right? We'd like a million of them. For sure. Okay, Robert, what's next?
All right. The next question is, how can I help youth overcome creative blocks?
Well, they talk about writer's block, right?
Hey, can I say something on that real quick? Take
Yeah.
2 weeks off and quit.
Yeah, exactly. I think that there are times for all of us when the thinking process gets blocked, right? And maybe it's that you get stuck on one piece, or you haven't had enough time to churn it over in your mind. Maybe you feel pressured, like there's a time frame and you're going, oh, I got to make it, and I'm just not coming up with things. So I think that you have to acknowledge that people get blocked for different reasons. Maybe they're too tired. Maybe they're too fragmented. Maybe they're too unsure of what the end result's supposed to be, right? There can be all kinds of reasons. So one of the things that I think is important to do when you get that is to get up and go somewhere else, even if it's a walk around your house, right? Or your classroom or something. So that, because the more you try and force your brain to do what it's revolting on doing, the less likely you are. And all you have to do is think about when there's a name or some place that you want to go, and it's just on the tip of my tongue and it's right here, and you start pressing yourself to come up with it, the least likely you are to be able to do that. And 15 minutes later, when you've gone on your merry way, you go, oh yeah, now I remember what it is. So I think that it's important to give people what I call a mental or a brain break, right? And it can be doing something totally different. And I know for me, because I work from home, one of the things I'll do is fold the laundry. And I know that sounds weird, but the laundry has to be folded. I have to fold it at any rate. And what it does is it takes my mind off of whatever I was focused on. And then I can go, oh yeah. And then I can go back and do that. So I think finding an alternative, or maybe it's a physical activity or reading something or doing something different for 15, 20 minutes can be really helpful to get you past your brain fog, not frog. So Coach, how about you? Ribbit, yeah, your brain frog.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. I mean, I think, writer's block is where I would have started as well. And, as you well know, we've been, creating a business system and other systems along the way, processes, procedures, schematics, I mean, you name it. And I run into this a lot, which is basically like a writer. So I call Gma, and I probably called her 3 times a day, and I said, can I vent to you, or can we problem solve, or, whatever the case may be. So if you don't have a Gma, well, then good luck to you. I don't know what to tell you. Ask ChatGPT. But no, I think that she's 100% right. Remember, the subconscious or the, is a lot more powerful than the conscious mind. And so a lot of times when we walk away, that subconscious is working. I know mine does that in my sleep lately, which isn't great for your health, but trying to solve the problems and the issues or challenges or different things of that nature. Another way to say it is with Entrusted Legacy, our nonprofit, we have a little girl that's got the little butterfly right there, because we have monarch butterfly colors. And we know you chase the butterfly and you go too much, you're not going to catch it. Sometimes if you relax and, it'll come right on your shoulder, so to speak. Now, again, I'm saying do as I say, not as I do, because I'm not very good at this, because I want to push through. Another one I would say is that rappers or songwriters, they say sometimes these songs, just like a writer of a book, it just was like, oh my gosh, this took forever. But they say other times they would write the whole song or the whole rap in less than an hour. And I know I've got on those roles, and I'm sure we all have, to where everything's just free flowing. And it's like, boom, 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 everything's clicking, everything's great. So, enjoy those times, celebrate those times when it happens. But if you hit that sticking point, go do something mindless, right? Like I do cards. I'm always fiddling with cards because, that's a mindless activity for me. So I'm going to stop there, but there's a lot more I can say. I don't know what's going on tonight. There's something in the water because I could be saying a lot about these questions more than normal.
Right. So you do cards and I fold laundry, both mindless tasks, right?
Yeah.
And I think that that's helpful. All
Well,
right, Robert, you're,
And one more thing too, I think you said it best a long time ago. When you're in the people business, right, you never know what's done. And so if you go dig a ditch, then that ditch, that 4x4 ditch is done. And so cards can be done, laundry can be done. I know back in the day you used to do photo albums that she actually turned into a nice business, just so we're all clear. But and I said, why do you do that? And you're like, I need to get something done because you never know with people. And so I think that comes into this as well.
agreed. Okay, Robert, what's next?
All right, next question is how can I balance structure with freedom in creative projects?
Okay. So, yeah, carefully. No, I don't know if any of you are familiar with the works of Simon Sinek, but Simon Sinek has what's called the golden circle. And I want you to picture a target with the outside circle, the middle circle, and the inner circle. And in the inner circle, it's your purpose. Why are you doing what you're doing? What is it you want to accomplish, right? It's the why of what you're doing. And maybe you're doing an art project for Father's Day. So the why is that you want the kids to be able to produce something that would be meaningful to their dad. Okay, that would be your why. And it's okay for you to talk. Either you can talk with others about the why, or you can decide on the why by yourself. That's fine. Then I want you to think about the outside circle, not the center circle, but the outside circle. So if what I want is for kids to be able to prepare a gift for Father's Day, what will they do? Well, what they will do is choose from maybe 10 different options or add to it. But what we're going to do is come up with and we can talk about it, but we're going to decide, are we going to have a card? Are we going to have a gift? What is it that you have to choose from? The autonomy, which is the center circle, not the one that's at the very center, but the one that surrounds that before the what, is called the how. That's where autonomy lies. And if you can give your kids freedom to be creative in the how they do it, even when you want a particular result, you can get that what result that you want, that outcome, but maybe they don't get there in your way, they get there in their own way. And I think that you can allow creativity in that, especially if you're trying to get an outcome they really need to have, but how are they going to get there? And that is where creativity can live. And that's called Sinek's golden circle. And I think that it serves you well. I can say, this is why we're doing it. This is what we're going to do. Now you decide how you're going to get there. And that allows for that ability to think through. And you have to be flexible because everybody's not going to resolve that in the same way. And you have to be open to that and not judge with a look, or a remark, but to really be open to how they see it. And if you're unclear what the heck they did, you can say, talk me through how you see this. And that can be helpful as well. So that's what I would say. How about you, Coach?
Yeah, so we talk about this a lot within a system that we created a long time ago. So play king and queen of the world, right? And so this is you saying, here's everything that I think needs to happen to accomplish this objective or this goal or whatever. So then with the kids, you're going to state the objective, and then you're going to shut up, shut your face, go relax, chill out, be by the pool, and then let them go to work. And so they can brainstorm. And so what will happen is that we usually say, hey, with yourself, brainstorm everything you can think of, right? And you get 1 minute. Then we're going to have you partner up, and you guys are going to get 2 minutes. And then we always switch them in the middle, so Gabby doesn't go too much into, it takes the full 2 minutes, and they each get about a minute in that. Then we say, okay, how about a small group of 4, and then we usually do a larger group, and then we do the whole group. And you'll be amazed what they come up with. But I think the most important thing is the shut up part. You need to just stay out of it, right? And this is basically what she just said with Cynic, but this is just the way that I would do it. It's basically the same premise. And I think what you find is that whether you say tomato or tomato, most of the great ideas, wherever they come from, they're very similar in nature, right? And so he's saying the same thing that I'm saying, and or vice versa. And then let them share out, and then let them try it, and then let them see, and then we have what we call the downright diagnostics. What did you like? What did you dislike? What are you undecided about? How are you going to celebrate the likes? How are you going to pivot or adjust off the dislikes? And then what are you going to do with what you're undecided about? Will you question it to put it to a like or a dislike? And so I think, going back to the structured schematics, the systems, the processes, the procedures, I think what Simon says and what we say are very similar.
Yeah. Well, and then also going back to the trifecta, right? Is it your mindset that everything has to look exactly one way, right? Is it what systems do you have in place? What structures? And then what can you do with the people to support that? Okay, so Robert, how many folks do we have on this evening?
We currently had 16 in total.
All right, and are they coming to us through YouTube or TikTok
Yeah,
or how?
it's a mix of all the ones that we're currently on.
Okay, perfect. Hello. And again, if you'd like to have some information on the trifecta, I'd love to be able to send it to you. I just need an email address to be able to do that. So you can share that information with us and we'll get that out to you in the next 2 days. Okay, you're up with a question.
Awesome. I just want to say also, we will be posting the link at the bottom of the video, so that's another way that you guys can reach to see the trifecta that Cindy was
Okay.
mentioning.
Perfect.
All right, and the next
Perfect.
question, our next question is going to be, how can I balance structure with freedom and creative projects?
I think we answered that. I think that's what we just did.
Oh,
Is
sorry
there
about
another
that.
one?
Yeah. The next one is, what role does curiosity play in fostering creativity?
For me, curiosity and wonder and awe is everything. I think that when you stop being curious and you go, whatever, that's a sad day. And I think that a lot of times we structure our learning opportunities with kids in such a way that they stop being curious. They did a wonderful study, and it was a longitudinal study, and it happened over an 8-year period. And they went in and they did a check on creativity, on how you feel about yourself, all of that stuff that allows you to be creative with kindergartners. And almost 100% of them were very creative, very open, very willing to try. When they looked at those same kids in 8th grade, it was only about 13%. We had taught them to not step out. We had taught them in the system of school to stay inside the lines. And sometimes you want kids to color inside the lines, and I get that. But there are times when it's okay to step outside, and we need to encourage that. And I think this ability to be curious, to just wonder. And so when a child says, why does the sun come up in the east? Right? That's a wonder. They see it every day. How come it doesn't come up in the north? How come it doesn't come up in the south? How come right now days are longer? And if that be true everywhere, I think it blows kids' mind when they think that in Australia right now it's winter, right? That doesn't seem right because they live in what they are. So this wonder is about wondering about the world and the place you live and being curious about it and not being willing to just go 1, 2, 3. And I may have shared this with this group before, but I'll share it again. In San Francisco, there is a private school, and the kids there are all pretty bright. And they were talking about, why does a candle go out, right? Why when you put the lid on a candle that's burning, does it go out? And the kids all said, because it lacks oxygen. And one kid said, I don't think that's the case. I think that it has too much carbon dioxide. And so they went through, and he cited one of the reasons he thought that when they talked to him about it was that when Apollo 13 was coming back and their system was really fouled up and nobody even knew for sure if the astronauts would get back. They had plenty of oxygen, but the air was polluted with too much carbon dioxide. And that was the problem. But this young man was able to go, I don't think so. I'm going to look at this differently. And pretty soon the whole class was looking at it differently, right? And so when kids speak up and are curious or wonder and say, well, how is that true if this is also true? And they look at those dichotomies, I think that they can become really, really creative. So I think that was my diatribe for the evening. So Coach, I'll give it to you.
Well, kudos to whoever the child champion was to be able to foster that kind of environment, which we talked about, in the previous questions above. Number two, I think that you instilled this in all of your kids. I can only speak for me, but we must have drove you crazy, because I know we asked 5 billion questions. Not that I do that as an adult with you, but as a kid, right? It's like, well, what about this? And what do you think about that? Well, what if we did this? Right? It's just that constant, asking and wondering and being curious. And so I think that it's an environmental thing, right? I mean, that's how you raised us. And obviously this child champion, that's how they decided to do their room. And so I think that's a big deal. I also say, become a troubleshooter, right? So people go, dude, you're one of the best troubleshooters that I've ever seen. And I go, yeah, because I see a lot of when I'm curious about it. I can walk up somebody's driveway and find 20 things that are wrong, right? I can find 20 things that are right too, but I'm like, okay, whatever. I want to mess with the stuff that's wrong because I want to troubleshoot. Well, what can we do there? Well, what should our mindset be? Okay, well, who's the player? Well, what's the structured schematics that we should do? What about this process? What about that process? What about this procedure? What about this protocol? Right? Like, to me, that's fun. And then we bring other people into it. And in the end, we solve the problem. And I'll just give you a quick touch point. So this is hilarious. You'd had to be there to get the full funniness of it, but it's still funny. So we had to take down this big tree in our first house. I mean, this sucker was like a redwood, man, 4 billion miles in the air. And so they wanted, even back then, like 2K, 1,000. Well, I'm a tightwad, so I found the guy in what we call Pumpkin Center, and he come out and he goes, I'll do it for $400. He was kind of an oaky guy, and he said, I'll do it for 400. I'm like, yeah, threaten me with a good time, buddy. Let's get it on. So I left, and I was teaching at the time, and when I left, he's looking up at this big tree. And when I came back at lunch, he's still looking at this tree, same position, and hasn't moved. And I'm like, is this guy going to be able to get this done? But he was figuring out how to be creative. And in the end, he went and did this, and this, and then something that was above his pay grade, so to speak. And he brought out this like 90-year-old man. And I'm watching now because now it's like 4 o'clock in the evening. And this old man said, I will put that. It was like, I don't know how high it was, but maybe, 30 feet at this time because the other guy had cut it all down. He goes, I will put that within 1 inch of whatever. And I'm like, there's no way. I'll bet you $5. So I went and spray painted within the 5 inches. That sucker landed right where he knew right where, to go. He knew how to cut it down and all that, and so on and so forth. So listen, we should be being creative on all kinds of stuff all the time and asking the questions and stirring the pot and figuring things out. And sometimes you open a hornet's nest and you're going to get stunned, but in the end, you'll get it done.
Yep. And that also is an example of creativity that you wouldn't think would be creative, right? We think that creative is always, generating something new, but he was handling a challenge in a new way. So that's awesome. All right, Robert, I think we've got a couple more questions. But what do you
All
have?
right. Our next question is: how can I teach youth to see problems as opportunities for creativity?
I think that goes with the whole notion of fail. Fail is first attempt in learning. And I think that we need to celebrate failures. I think we need to say, awesome, great work. Now you know one thing not to do. How can you modify this? And maybe you don't just change everything. Maybe you just tweak it a little bit. It's always interesting to me when you see kids who've been given a writing assignment, and they'll do the writing assignment, and then they'll get remarks on the writing assignment about some suggestions. And what they do is they start the writing assignment all over. And that's not the point. The point, part of creativity, is knowing how to make a tweak or an adjustment. And I think that Coach has said this before, at 211 degrees, water does not boil. But if you can tweak it and adjust it just a touch, it'll get to 212 degrees and it will boil, right? So just like the person he talked about with the tree, he was able to look at it until he could visualize it in his mind so that he knew exactly what was going to happen. And so I think that we need to help kids understand that creativity isn't being Picasso, although being Picasso can be creative, right? All creativity isn't contained in the arts. Creativity is looking at things in a different way and seeing what you can do to improve and enhance the situation you're in. So, Coach, I'll give that to you.
Yeah, I guess I'm on trees right now. I was watching a short the other day, and they have a competition where these guys have to basically go up a totem pole, and what they have to do is like do a couple of chops, and then they stick this board in, and they jump up on the board. They do a couple more, stick another board in, and at the top they have to cut it all the way off. And so the one guy just sat there, and everybody else is going. They're going, 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 and he just sat there. I mean, for the longest time, and I'm like, what the heck, dude? You're never going to get it done. And then when he went up one side like everybody else did, but then he drops all the way down and does the same thing on the other side, and he wins the whole thing. So talk about being creative, right? So I guess I'm on trees and logs. The other thing is that the biggest gold find in the history of the world, when you were talking about at 211 water doesn't boil and at 212 it does, they moved it over 3 feet, dude. That was it, right? So does that seem super creative? Not really, but it was creative enough to have the biggest gold find in the history of the world. The other thing is, like when she was talking about the boiling water, the 100 meters, it's milliseconds, right? It's 1/10 or 1/100, the difference between first place and a gold medal and millions of dollars in endorsements, and fourth place where you don't even get an olive branch anymore and you're getting nothing. So what's the creativity there? Well, it's what they're doing in practice, right? Just like we talked about earlier with the long distance runners, they started running at altitude. Or the UFC guys, they have this breathing mask on that helps it to where it makes it more difficult to breathe, which helps them when you take it off. We've all been there before. Go breathe in a straw and then go run, right? And then breathe in it again. You're not doing anything. But if you do that over and over and over again, your body is going to be like, okay, great. Now I'm used to it. So being creative is a huge thing. The last thing I'll say is this. Look, and we talked about this last week. You either win or you learn. There doesn't have to be a loss. You either win or you learn. And if you take that mentality, then there's really no problems per se to begin with. So, how do we teach them to see problems as opportunities of creativity? We don't see them as problems anyway. It's like GMA said many times ago, or Thomas Edison, I just knew one less thing to or one thing to not do anymore, and it took him 10,000 tries to eventually get it right. So I think that a lot of that goes back to the trifecta and the mindset of things.
Absolutely, absolutely. I think that it's. I was thinking about this whole notion of the word problem, right? Problem or challenge indicates to you that something's not okay. And so maybe it's okay just the way it is, but you'd like to improve it. You'd like to strengthen it. You'd like to do that. And so one of the words that I got that's an acronym that I like a lot is called a SITNA, SITNA, and it stands for situation, SIT, in need of attention. And so that means that you can have something that's working extremely well, but what you would like to do is take it to the next level. You have looked at it, you've experienced it enough, and you can see how to ratchet it up. So I do think that I think words do matter. And I think that the word problem and challenge can be a negative word and put you in a different sort of mode. I know when we used to work with staff, they asked us to not use the word improve. They said, when you use the word improve, we feel like we're not good enough. But if you use the word strengthen, we feel good about that. So we learned to say, we're going to strengthen your practice. Not we're going to improve your practice, but we're going to strengthen your practice. And they felt like that meant that we were acknowledging their foundation. And so just simple words like that can make a difference as well, and can encourage kids to take a risk and to be creative and not try and just replicate something. So I don't know if you want to add to that, Coach, or not, or we'll go to Robert.
No, I think you're right, and that's hard for somebody like me because even if you talk about the delivery, right? We talk about, I forget what your stats are, but when we're talking, tone matters much more than anything else. So I could say the exact same thing, right? And I remember that they would accuse me when I was coaching. They're like, "You're negative. You're negative." I'm like, "Really? Well, what am I saying?" They're saying, "Well, hands up and go get the ball and da da da." I said, "Am I negative or am I loud?" And they're like, "Oh, I guess you're just loud." I go, "Yeah, I'm loud. That's true, but I'm not negative, right?" And so I think that from my perspective, it's hard because if somebody's yelling and screaming at me about whatever, then I'm going to still listen to the message, even if I don't like the delivery. But I think all of those kind of go hand in glove together, or shoe and foot.
Yep, absolutely. Okay, Robert, I think we have time for one more, maybe two, but one for sure.
All right, the last question is, what strategies promote collaboration in creative endeavors?
So I think that, first of all, I think that people think collaboration is easy. And I don't think it is. I think it's a learned skill. I think that you might cooperate with someone, right? You'll get along with someone, you'll play nice with someone, but that doesn't mean you're collaborating. Collaborating means that you're intentionally listening and paying attention to the other person and seeing how what they're saying fits with what you think and how it expands what you think. Collaboration is really and truly trying to get multiple brains to row in exactly the same direction, right? So that they're looking at and then honoring it when it goes to an offshoot. When somebody goes, "Oh, wait a minute, what about this?" So I think that this notion of collaboration, I think that it's a learned skill. And I think we don't spend time on it because we just think that kids are going to automatically do that. And so I guess I would say to you, think of all the times that you try and get a child to share, right? Sharing is collaborating to a degree, and kids don't like to share. And I've often said the only thing you work hours on getting kids to share, and the one thing they share with you is their cold or the flu. They do that pretty easily. But to share an idea, to share a toy, to be able to give you credit for having done your part of it, which I think is all part of collaboration, to be able to say, we came up with this. not I came up with this or so-and-so said this. No, all together, you work towards the common goal. So I think in collaboration, it needs to be something that it can be done by a team who's working all towards the same goal rather than a group who just happens to be hanging out together. I think that those are different. And I think you can do things that are like a design challenge. A design challenge is easier to do when you're working collaboratively, but you have to be willing to listen to both pieces or both parties or all four parties. So I think it's important, but I think you really have to set that stage so that collaboration can happen and work on it a lot and talk about what idea did you take from the other people? Ask that kind of question and then reward them for working as a collaborative team rather than as individuals. Everybody gets a Super Bowl ring, only some people get the $50 million contract. All right, so Coach, I left you 3 minutes.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to talk slow because I don't like the word to begin with, and we talked about this balance versus harmony. And
Right.
so, for those of you that haven't heard that before, I don't believe in balance, right? We believe that there's 5 sections in that, overall life and spiritual, religious, or if you're not into that, you can just call it mindset. And then you have family, friends, your health, and then we call it particularly personal. How do you sharpen the saw and go out and be social and all that? And you have your candid career. Well, not to use my mom as an example, but she had an issue several years back, and in balance, it would have said I would have went to work and I would have talked to other family members and I would have done all this in a balanced way, like putting a graphic equalizer to where they're all on the same spot. But you know as well as I do, a graphic equalizer, if they even have those nowadays, right? They're in different spots. And so we liken that to the orchestra. Sometimes the trumpets are going, the spiritual religious, ah! Sometimes, the health is doing nothing because you're in great health and things are going great. Sometimes it's the drums, and maybe that's representative of the family and friends and so on and so forth. Well, when I hear collaboration, maybe it's just something I have in my own brain because I think Grandma described it well. But I hear pre-K, K-12 educators that collaborate and they collaborate and they collaborate and they collaborate, but they never get anything done. So I'm very results oriented, and so the word just by itself bothers me. But using that as the word is probably intended here, I think there's a lot of things that you can do. I think you can do role playing games. I think it's built in with sports. We've talked about this before, where in sports you have to be collaborative. You don't have a choice in the matter unless your sport is, an individual sport like wrestling or boxing or whatever. But discounting that, like you have to come together as a team to be able to ultimately move forward. So to me, in some areas, it's built in. But I like what Gmail had to say overall. I'm sorry I went on my rant, but that word just bothers me.
Well, I think, that sometimes, I think groups collaborate endlessly and get nothing done. I think if you've created a team where you've got a clear goal about what you want to, what are you working toward, right? What's the outcome that you're looking for? I think that collaboration can be really helpful, but it's because it's set up in an environment to be helpful, right? And to be successful, not to just walk in a circle.
Yeah, and I guess for me it's just semantics, but I understand what people are saying with that.
Yeah.
Whatever.
Absolutely. Well, thank you all. I think we've hit our 7:00 hour. Thank you for being with us. Again, provide us with some contact information. We'll send you. It's a 2-pager on the trifecta so that you can grasp that maybe a little more clearly. And we look forward to it and have an absolutely amazing 4th of July. Celebrate, be with family.